The Sapphire Prison. Chapter 1. The Golden Tether. The Oceanus was less a ship and more a floating testament to aggressive opulence. It carved through the Mediterranean, a monolith of polished teak and brass, insulating its wealthy inhabitants from the raw, untamable nature of the sea beneath them. For Clara, however, it was merely a gilded cage with a better view. She stood on the private balcony of the owner's suite, the silk of her evening gown whipping against her legs in the warm evening breeze. Inside, her husband, Alistair, was holding court. Alistair, a man whose affection felt like ownership, whose love was a heavy, suffocating blanket of diamonds and surveillance. He didn't just occupy a room, he consumed the oxygen within it. "Enjoying the view, my darling?" Alistair's voice drifted out, smooth and cold like aged scotch. He emerged, placing a hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a caress. It was an anchor point, a reminder of territory. "It's breathtaking, Alistair," she replied, her voice practiced, hollow. Needino to escape his suffocating orbit, she excused herself later that night to the upper deck's jazz club, a dimly lit cavern of velvet and smoke. That was where she saw him. His name was Elias. He wasn't part of Alistair's world of corporate sharks and old money. He was a pianist in the ship's lounge, possessing an ephemeral artistic quality that seemed entirely out of place in this floating monument to capitalism. When their eyes met across the crowded room, the air between them didn't just charge, it seemed to vanish, leaving Clara breathless. He approached her during his break. The conversation was effortless, a stark contrast to the transactional dialogues she was used to. He saw her, not Alistair's wife. He noticed the sadness she carefully painted over with expensive makeup. "You look like someone desperately trying to remember what freedom feels like," Elias murmured, leaning close enough that she could smell sandalwood and the sea salt clinging to his jacket. It was a dangerous observation, a terrifyingly accurate one. For the first time in 5 years, Clara felt a spark ignite in the dormant landscape of her soul. She knew, with a sickening lurch of adrenaline, that she was about to burn down her life. As she returned to her suite hours later, dizzy with illicit possibilities, she found Alistair awake. He was sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the glowing tip of a cigar. "You smell different, Clara," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "You smell like hope. I wonder who gave that to you." Chapter 2. The Midnight Meridian. The affair unfolded in the stolen shadows of the colossal ship. It was a frantic, visceral collision of two people starving for connection. They met in lifeboats under the cover of a moonless sky, in empty crew corridors, and once, recklessly, in Elias's cramped, humid cabin below decks. With Elias, Clara shed the persona of the trophy wife. The intimacy between them was profound, almost painful in its intensity. He worshipped the parts of her that Alistair ignored. Her intellect, her quiet, artistic ambitions, her hidden scars. Making love to Elias felt like an act of rebellion, a reclamation of her own body. "He will kill you if he finds out," Elias whispered one night, tracing the line of her jaw as the ship rocked gently beneath them. His eyes, usually bright with music, were darkened by fear. Men like Alistair don't lose things. They destroy them so no one else can have them. "He won't find out," Clara lied, desperately trying to believe it. "We dock in Naples in 2 days. I'll leave him then. We can disappear." It was a naive fantasy born of desperation. Clara was deluding herself about the reach of Alistair's power. He was a man who treated the world as his personal chessboard, and he was already several moves ahead. The tension on the ship became palpable. Alistair's jealousy wasn't a fiery explosion. It was an insidious, creeping frost. He became hyper-attentive, his eyes tracking her every movement with predatory stillness. He would caress her arm, his grip just a fraction too tight, his smile not quite reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He knew. The air in their suite grew thick with unspoken accusations. The night before they were scheduled to dock in Naples, Clara slipped out one last time to meet Elias on the aft deck. The rendezvous was brief, desperate, filled with tearful promises of a future freedom. But when Clara returned to the owner's suite at 3 a.m., the door was ajar. The lights were blazing. Alistair was standing in the center of the room. On the coffee table sat Clara's burner phone, the one she used only for Elias. It was unlocked, displaying a stream of their most intimate messages. Alistair looked up, his face a terrifying mask of serene fury. "Did you really think," he whispered, the silence of the room amplifying his voice, "that you could steal from me, Clara?" Chapter 3. The Black Wake. The confrontation was not a screaming match, it was an execution of the soul. Alistair methodically dismantled her defences, quoting her own words of love for Elias back to her with dripping venom. His jealousy was a living thing in the room, a suffocating force that paralysed her. "You are mine, Clara. By law, by finance, and by the sheer fact that I purchased the very air you breathe," Alistair snarled, grabbing her face, forcing her to look into his abyssal eyes. "And I do not share." The docking in Naples the next morning was a blur of terror. Clara expected public humiliation, perhaps lawyers waiting on the pier. She did not expect the needle. As they prepared to disembark, Alistair offered her a glass of champagne, a peace offering, he called it, his eyes glittering maliciously. Foolishly, desperately hoping to de-escalate his rage, she drank it. The world tilted on its axis within minutes. Her limbs turned to lead. Her thoughts dissolved into a thick fog. The last thing she remembered was Alistair's arm around her waist, holding her upright as they walked down the gangway, whispering into her ear, "Sleep now, my darling. The real voyage is just beginning." When consciousness clawed its way back, the gentle rock of the sea was gone. Clara was lying on a cot in a room that smelled of damp stone and old earth. There were no windows, only a heavy iron door. It wasn't a prison cell, not exactly. It was an antique wine cellar converted into a holding pen. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system. She stumbled to the door, pounding on the iron until her fists bled. "Alistair, let me out!" she screamed, her voice raw. Silence was her only answer for hours. Finally, the heavy bolts groaned back. The door swung open, blinding her with sudden light. Standing there wasn't Alistair. It was Elias. But he wasn't the lover who had held her tenderly in the dark. He was dressed in expensive clothes that didn't fit him right, looking ill and terrified. Behind him, leaning casually against the doorframe with a sadistic smirk, stood Alistair. "You see, Clara," Alistair said smoothly, stepping into the cellar, "I believe in symmetry. You wanted to be together. I've arranged it. Welcome to your honeymoon suite." Chapter 4. The Echo Chamber. The villa was isolated, perched precariously on a cliff edge somewhere on the Amalfi coast, accessible only by a winding private road. This was Alistair's ancestral home, and now Clara's prison. The torment Alistair devised was psychologically exquisite. He didn't lock them in the cellar. He gave them the run of the villa, but all exits were alarmed and guarded by silent, imposing security men. The true torture was the presence of Elias. Alistair had broken the pianist. He revealed that he had bought Elias's massive gambling debts days before the cruise began. The romance, the seduction, it had all been orchestrated by Alistair as a fidelity test. A test Clara had spectacularly failed. "He never loved you, Clara," Alistair murmured over dinner one evening, slicing his steak with surgical precision, while Elias sat silently staring at his plate, a broken puppet. He was just performing for his supper, weren't you, Elias? Elias wouldn't look at her. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. The intimacy they had shared, the truths she had revealed, it was all ammunition for Alistair now. Yet, as days turned into weeks in this sun-drenched hell, Clara noticed cracks in the narrative. The way Elias flinched when Alistair raised his voice. The look of profound, wretched guilt he shot her when he thought she wasn't looking. Perhaps he had started as a pawn, but something real had developed. Alistair's jealousy morphed into a bizarre voyeurism. He forced them to sit together, to play duets on the grand piano while he watched, sipping brandy, feeding on the palpable misery and complex currents of tension between them. He was the conductor of their pain. One stormy night, while Alistair was occupied with a business call in his study, Elias slipped a folded piece of paper into Clara's hand. His touch was electric, frightened. Clara unfolded it in the privacy of her locked bedroom. It was a map of the villa's grounds, with a small X marking a sea cave at the base of the cliffs. Below it, a scrawled message. "He plans to kill us both when he gets bored. Tonight is our only chance." The tide is low at 2 a.m. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Was this real? Or was it another layer of Alistair's twisted game, designed to crush her hope completely? The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 1:45 a.m. She heard the heavy tread of Alistair's footsteps pausing outside her door. The doorknob slowly began to turn. Chapter 5. The Final Tide. The door was locked, but Alistair had the key. He always had the key. He stepped into her bedroom, the storm outside casting long, flickering shadows across his face. He held a small black pistol loosely at his side. "Going somewhere, Clara?" he asked softly. He held up the map Elias had drawn. Elias is terrible at keeping secrets. He broke under the slightest pressure. He told me everything about your little escape plan. Clara's world collapsed. It had been another trap. Alistair grabbed her wrist, pulling her roughly from the room. "Come, let's say goodbye to your lover together." He dragged her out into the raging storm, down the treacherous stone steps carved into the cliff face toward the sea. The wind howled, tearing at their clothes, the spray of the ocean stinging their faces. They reached a small plateau just above the churning black water. Elias was already there on his knees, sobbing, held at gunpoint by one of Alistair's guards. Alistair shoved Clara down beside Elias. The betrayal was absolute. She couldn't even look at the pianist. "This is how it ends, Clara," Alistair shouted over the roar of the waves, aiming the pistol at Elias's head. "You chose him over me. Now watch him die for it." "No!" Clara screamed, lunging forward not to save Elias, but to stop the madness. Alistair backhanded her, sending her sprawling onto the wet stone. In that split second of distraction, Elias moved. Not toward Alistair, but toward Clara. He threw his body over hers just as Alistair fired. The shot cracked through the storm. Elias jerked violently, dead weight falling onto Clara. Alistair stood frozen, stunned by Elias's final redemptive act. He looked down at the smoking gun in his hand, then at Clara, trapped beneath the man who had truly loved her in the end. For the first time, Alistair's impenetrable facade cracked. A look of profound emptiness washed over him. He had destroyed everything to possess her, and in doing so, had ensured she would never, ever be his. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the wind. The guards must have called it in when the shot was fired. Alistair looked at the approaching lights, then at the dark, churning water below. He couldn't face a cage of his own. With a final, hollow look at Clara, Alistair stepped backward off the ledge, disappearing silently into the unforgiving Black Sea. Clara lay pinned beneath Elias's body as the rain washed the blood into the ocean. She was alive. She was free of Alistair. But as she looked at Elias's still face, she realized the Sapphire Prison hadn't truly released her. It had just changed its form. She was alone in the storm, the sole survivor of a shipwreck built by jealousy. The end.